This program contains scenes that have been dramatized, with special attention given to historical accuracy. Los Angeles, Saturday, August 9th, 1969. The city of angels sleeps quietly, unaware that a man named Charles Manson is about to plunge it into terror.
Just an incredible orgy of murder.
Manson, borrowing from the Beatles, gives it a name, Helter Skelter.
If you're not safe in your home, where are you safe?
It will be up to LA law enforcement and prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi to go head-to-head with this charismatic force of darkness.
I realized that it would be one of my biggest mistakes I could ever make to underrate him.
The year is 1969. America is divided over the war in Vietnam. Easy Rider tops the box office. Woodstock rocks a generation. It's the heyday of the counterculture. But 35-year-old Vincent Bugliosi is focused on building his career. The ambitious prosecutor has been with the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office for 5 years. He is not afraid to get his hands dirty.
I was handling one case after another, working 7 days a week. One robbery, rape, murder case after another.
His conviction rate is stellar. 104 trials, 103 convictions.
My goal down at the DA's office was to become the best prosecutor in the office, the top trial lawyer.
Was there anything...
That November, he gets a case that thrusts him into the national spotlight. The savage murders of actress Sharon Tate and 6 others. In time, the case will expose the dark side of the counterculture and pit Bugliosi against one of the most enigmatic criminals of all time, Charles Manson. When it's all over, Bugliosi will turn the experience into a book. The uniquely shocking true crime tale, Helter Skelter. The publisher's simple yet chilling introduction to this best-selling tour de force. The story you are about to read will scare the hell out of you. Saturday morning, August 9th, 1969. The LAPD receives a frantic call. A multiple homicide at 10,050 Cielo Drive, the home of actress Sharon Tate and her new husband, film director Roman Polanski. Los Angeles police officers Jerry Joe DeRosa and William T. Weisenhunt are the first on the scene. In a white car parked in the driveway, they find a body. Male, Caucasian, appears to be in his teens. He's been shot 4 times. On the front lawn, they find body number 2. Male, probably in his 30s, about 5 feet 10, shot, stabbed, and bludgeoned. Body number 3. Female, probably in her late 20s, stabbed repeatedly.
There was no reason to check the pulse. It was obvious just by looking at the bodies that they were dead.
The house seems quiet. Too quiet. As the other officers enter the home through a side window, DeRosa approaches the front entrance. The word pig is scrawled in blood on the front door. In the living room, they discover body number 4. Female, very pregnant, probably in her 20s, stabbed multiple times. A white nylon rope is looped around her neck twice, one end extending over a rafter on the ceiling, the other end leading across the floor to body number 5. Male, about 5 feet 6, shot and stabbed.
There was 102 stab wounds altogether. The type of thing you don't even see in horror movies. The consensus of even some of the hardcore detectives that they'd never seen such a scene of human massacre in their entire career. They were just aghast at it.
Yeah, this is DeRosa, 5320.
At 9:40 a.m., Officer DeRosa calls headquarters requesting backup. Reporters hear the call over police radio and descend on the secluded Bel Air home.
Yes, she is pregnant, but I'm not going to...
Before you knew it, the helicopters were there and the coroner's office, and quite a few members of the LAPD arrived.
Just before noon, the murder victims are identified.
These were fairly prominent people. You know, Sharon Tate was on the threshold of stardom, a very beautiful woman. Jay Sebring was perhaps the most famous hairstylist in the world at that time. He was the hairstylist to the stars. Abigail Folger, heiress to a coffee fortune, and her jet-set Playboy boyfriend, Wojtek Frykowski.
Marijuana and cocaine are found at the crime scene. Hollywood's reputation for wild parties fuels suspicions that the slayings are somehow drug-related. But Vince Bugliosi senses there's more to the story than movie star decadence.
The first theory is that this was drug-related, and I never felt that way from the very beginning. When you start finding words printed in blood and this massive murder, you know, a multiplicity of stab wounds, that doesn't sound like a drug transaction gone bad. Law enforcement looks to their textbooks on police science and stuff like that. Immediately, I suspected a bizarre motive.
At 10:35 the following night, Officers W.C. Rodriguez and J.C. Toney are dispatched to 3301 Waverly Drive, east of Hollywood. They enter the residence and find 44-year-old grocery chain owner Lino LaBianca. A pillow over his head, a cord around his neck, and a carving fork sticking out of his stomach. He has been stabbed repeatedly, and the word war is carved into the flesh of his abdomen. His wife, 38-year-old Rosemary LaBianca, is found lying face down on the bedroom floor in a large pool of blood. Like her husband Lino, a cord is tied around her neck and a pillowcase has been pulled over her head.
I think Rosemary had 41 stab wounds. Lino had 28 stab wounds. Another horrible night of murder. And that's the very next night after the Tate murders.
Again, the officers discover words written in blood. On the wall in the living room, death to pigs. On another wall near the front door, rise. And on the refrigerator door in the kitchen, the bizarre phrase, Helter Skelter.
Now we're going away from the movie colony and wealthy people. Now we're in just a regular, everyday type of L.A. So no one felt safe now.
There is one man, however, who is not shocked by these murders. They are, in fact, part of his master plan. But the diabolical killer will find a fierce opponent in Vince Bugliosi. August 1969. Los Angeles is reeling from a brutal killing spree that has left 7 dead, including actress Sharon Tate, the wife of film director Roman Polanski.
Roman Polanski, the famed movie director, seems to have a penchant himself for violence and horror in some of his films. And he himself, I don't think, could have conceived of a more monstrous, macabre scene of human terror and massacre than that which took place at his own residence.
On Wednesday, the 13th, 4 days after her murder, many of Hollywood's biggest stars attend Sharon Tate's funeral. The grisly slaying of Tate and 4 others, along with the murders the following night of Lino and Rosemary LaBianca, have left the city on edge.
Many people were frightened, particularly in the movie colony, Bel Air, Beverly Hills. Parties were canceled, people were dropped from guest lists because no one knew if the murderers were among them. Overnight, there was a dramatic increase in the sale of guns and guard dogs. Private security services had to double, quadruple their personnel. So the fear was actually measurable.
In the hills northwest of L.A. sits a rundown Western film set called Spahn's Movie Ranch. It is home to 34-year-old Charles Manson, the leader of a hippie commune. His family consists of about 20 to 30 young people who have dropped out and are vulnerable to a charismatic figure like Manson.
These kids, for the most part, came from average American homes, had fairly good backgrounds. However, all of them, without exception, had already dropped out of society before they met Charles Manson, were heavily committed to the counterculture. Most of them were heavily involved also in the use of psychedelic drugs. So Manson had the raw material to work with. He had total control over the members of his family, this hypnotic spell over them.
Although he looks the part, Charles Manson breaks the stereotype of a peace-loving hippie.
Manson has an enormous hostility towards society. He was using his minions to vent his spleen on society. And here's someone whose hero was Adolf Hitler.
3 weeks after the Tate LaBianca murders, Manson moves his flock to an isolated shack near Death Valley called Barker Ranch. There, they come under the scrutiny of the Inyo County Sheriff's Department. Police suspect the group of stealing cars and burning buildings. They raid the ranch.
So Manson himself and several other members of the family were arrested in early October of 1969, but there was no indication at that point that they were the Tate LaBianca killers.
A few days after Manson and his family are imprisoned in Independence, California, Los Angeles Lieutenant Paul LePage, the top detective on the LaBianca case, gets a lead from a routine call to the LA Sheriff's Office. They tell him that they've been questioning a 21-year-old woman named Susan Atkins. Atkins is a suspect in another gruesome slaying. The details of this crime are similar to the Tate LaBianca murders. LePage finally has something to go on, and Susan Atkins is about to make his job even easier.
You want to hear something that'll blow your mind?
She told these two co-inmates, Virginia Graham and Ronnie Howard, that she was a member of a very beautiful family. And there was a man by the name of Charlie who was the head of the family. And they were responsible for all these murders that the police were trying to solve. Tate LaBianca murders.
In an eerily detached voice, she describes how Sharon Tate begged for her life.
Sharon said, "Please let me live so I can have my baby." And Susan says, "Look, bitch, I don't have any mercy on you. You're gonna die," and then stabs her to death. So it's just incredible.
Graham and Howard are shocked.
They didn't want to squeal, but this was something that they said, wait a while, this could happen at our home. This is so bizarre, so far out, so dangerous that we've got to go to the authorities.
On a break during a court appearance, Ronnie Howard phones the police. On November 17th, 2 LAPD homicide detectives interview her at the prison. Her information changes everything. She reveals the chilling story Susan Atkins told her and gives details of the horrible killings of Sharon Tate, her friends, and the LaBiancas. The LAPD learns that the family Atkins described as being held on theft and arson charges in Independence, 225 miles northeast of LA.
That was the first big break in the case. And from that point on, all of law enforcement, their attention, their suspicions, their resources were focused on the Manson family.
Deputy District Attorney Vincent Bugliosi is heading back to his office after winning a grueling case when a fellow prosecutor, Aaron Stovitz, hurries him into their boss's office. He is brought up to speed on the murders and quickly realizes that this case will be all-consuming.
And I look over to Aaron and I say, are we going to be involved in this case? He said, yeah. And I said, phew, like that.
The young prosecutor knows that convicting the family for the slayings will be a challenge, but he will make it his crusade to prove the guilt of its ringleader, Charles Manson. You are watching True Crime Authors. November 1969, LA Deputy District Attorney Vincent Bugliosi is on a collision course with Charles Manson, the mysterious leader of a band of hippies called the family. To convict Manson and his followers for the shockingly brutal Tate LaBianca murders, Bugliosi must dig deep into the inner workings of the family and the twisted motivations of its father.
I knew that it was going to be my life. I just totally immersed myself in it.
To get inside his adversary's head, Bugliosi sets out to learn everything there is to know about Charles Manson.
I started reading all about his background and everything, and it turns out he's this ex-con with a long and checkered criminal history.
He discovers that Manson has been a thief and a pimp, and that he's already spent over half of his life in prison. On November 19th, Bugliosi drives to the family's primary hideout, Spahn's Movie Ranch, 30 miles northwest of downtown LA.
That was where they lived on these 2 nights of murder. That's where they left from to commit these murders. It was very eerie out there.
That evening, Bugliosi travels to the county jail in Independence, California, where Manson and 10 of his family members are being held on charges unrelated to the Tate LaBianca case. It's here that the prosecutor gets his first glimpse of Charles Manson.
He's 5'2", this little Mephistophelian guru. Very thin, not sturdily built at all, somewhat hunchbacked, long hair, a beard, kind of scraggly dressed, unkempt. Not an imposing figure.
While in Independence, Bugliosi questions female members of the family. He learns that despite Manson's diminutive size, he has a godlike hold over these young people.
Everyone in the family was completely, totally subservient to Charles Manson. They'd do anything in the world for him. He told his family, he said, all of you have been programmed by society, schools, churches, parents. He says, it's my job to unprogram you. Manson would sit alone on top of a big rock, philosophize on life. The other members of the family sitting on the ground in a circle around. No one else would talk unless he spoke to them first. There's sex orgies. Manson was like a maestro, orchestrating what everyone else did. No one else touched anyone else, kissed anyone else, or made love to anyone else unless Manson told to do so. They actually thought that he was Jesus and the devil, all wrapped up into one person. There was just the look, you know, of the true believer on their face. They had this peacefulness, this tranquility about them, that they had found the answer, and the answer was Charlie.
The young women tell Bugliosi how Manson instructed them to break into isolated Southern California homes to spook citizens with a little game he called the creepy crawl.
They'd crawl into these mansions in Beverly Hills at night and rearrange all the furniture, and people would wake up in the morning and they'd be very frightened because the furniture had been rearranged.
Bugliosi now knows that Manson is no ordinary criminal. He is the leader of a cult, and a powerful leader at that.
I realized that it would be one of my biggest mistakes I could ever make to underrate him.
The prosecutor travels back to LA and interviews Susan Atkins, the young woman who had bragged to her cellmates that she was a killer.
She said, you know, Charlie's watching us now, and he can hear everything that we're saying. I said, Susan, I said, Charlie's up in Independence, a couple hundred miles away. She says, well, Charlie knows what's going on.
Atkins tells Bugliosi the story of the Tate murders and admits to stabbing Sharon Tate at least a dozen times. Although he cannot yet connect Manson to the murders, Bugliosi decides to seek indictments against him and 5 of his followers.
It was clear to me that Manson was the killer, and as soon as I realized that, I didn't care how weak the case was. If I determine who's guilty, then it's just a matter of time before I'm able to prove it.
Susan Atkins will be a star witness.
But she's gotten a deal. She's saving her life. We're not going to ask for the death penalty, and she's allowed to plead guilty to second-degree murder.
On December 5th, 1969, Susan Atkins goes before the grand jury and calmly describes the family's savage murder spree. On the night of the Tate murders, Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, Linda Kasabian, and Tex Watson were Manson's chosen few.
He told the girls to go along with Tex and do whatever Tex told them to do. They approached the residence. It's a little after midnight. Watson slits a screen in one of the front windows, goes through the window, no one sees him apparently, opens up the front door, and lets Susan Atkins and Patricia Krenwinkel in. Linda Kasabian stayed on the outside. Wojtek Frykowski was lying on a couch, sleeping. He awakens and says to Watson, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" And Watson says to him, "I'm the devil, and I'm here to do the devil's business." They tie Frykowski up, and then they go into the bedrooms.
The others were rounded up into the living room. When Jay Sebring protested, Watson shot him.
And Watson said, "You're all gonna die." And they all started to scream, bloody murder, just screaming at the top of their lungs. Please, please, begging for their lives.
Watson then tied up Sharon Tate and Abigail Folger. Atkins attempted to stab Frykowski, but he twisted away from her. As he was running out into the front yard, Watson caught up with him and finished him off. Watson returned to the house, and after stabbing Abigail Folger and helping Atkins kill Sharon Tate, he ordered her to write something on the door in the blood of one of the victims.
She dipped a towel in Sharon Tate's blood and wrote the words "pig" on the front door of the Tate residence. I remember one of the grand jurors just had to get up and leave the room, you know, it was just so nauseating.
Atkins then tells the grand jury that the next night, Manson ordered his family back out into the LA darkness. This time, Manson went with his followers.
And they start driving throughout the city of Los Angeles looking for their victims completely at random. If you were Caucasian and appeared to be a person of easy circumstances, you qualified to be murdered.
When they stopped in front of the home of Lino and Rosemary LaBianca, Manson got out and entered the residence. Minutes later, he came back out and coolly reported that he had tied them up. Next, he commanded his disciples to go inside and, quote, paint a picture more gruesome than anybody had ever seen. They entered the home and slaughtered Rosemary and Lino LaBianca.
There were 169 stab wounds on these 2 consecutive nights of murder. You'd have to scour the face of this globe to find another group like these people. And if they hadn't been stopped, they were going to continue to kill.
After describing the murder sprees, Susan Atkins nonchalantly steps down from the witness stand. The grand jury is stunned.
I remember looking at their faces and they're just shaking their head. They can't believe what they're hearing. Can't believe what they're hearing.
Tex Watson is in jail in Texas and will be tried later. But Manson and the 3 women are indicted by the grand jury. Putting Manson away is Bugliosi's top priority.
To convict the others and have him walk out of court would have been an unsuccessful prosecution.
Bugliosi must now find a way to convince a jury that Manson's weapon of choice, mind control, is just as deadly as the knives and guns the others used in the murders. He must also prove that Manson had a reason to kill.
If Manson did not physically participate in the murders and was not even there, then motive becomes extremely important. Because if he not only didn't commit the murder, but had no motive to have anyone else do it, how do you convict someone like that?
In fact, Manson himself has provided the answer. The motive was written at the crime scene, written with the blood of the victims. Bugliosi learns that Manson, a frustrated musician, had found meaning in the songs of his favorite rock band.
Manson idolized the Beatles. He thought they were prophets, speaking to him subliminally beneath the lyrics of their songs. And they came out with an album in December of 1968 called The White Album. One of the songs in the album was called Helter Skelter. And that was a term that Manson used to describe the last, final, destructive war on the face of this earth, and he thought between blacks and whites. And he told his family, we can start this war between blacks and whites by committing the murders and then framing the black man for these murders. And he said that'll cause the white community to turn against the black community. There'll be this all-out war, Helter Skelter.
Manson told his followers that after this Armageddon, they would rule the world.
I have to say that Manson's killers, in my opinion, bought this helter-skelter philosophy, hook, line, and sinker. And he used it to work them up into an emotional lather as a justification for the murders.
Helter Skelter, the motive Bugliosi has been looking for. It is clear to Bugliosi that Manson's followers would go to the ends of the earth for their leader and his twisted agenda. But would a jury believe that they would kill for him? January 1970. Vincent Bugliosi must somehow prove that Charles Manson is guilty of killing Sharon Tate and 6 others, even though Manson himself was not present during the murders.
The Manson case was viewed as a very weak case, particularly down at the DA's office and in the legal community. But as soon as I came to realize that Manson totally dominated these people, it couldn't be more clear to me. I think they all had a very deep-seated, pre-existing hostility towards society. Manson was the catalyst that brought that hostility to the surface.
Bugliosi's case hinges on his ability to prove that Manson's control over the family was so complete that he could use them to fulfill his own desire for bloodshed.
Manson had a motive for these murders, and that motive was Helter Skelter, to ignite a black-white war. Helter Skelter was his philosophy on life. It was he who introduced it into the family, talked about it all the time.
Late in February 1970, Susan Atkins, who had agreed to tell her story in court, changes her mind. She will not testify against Manson and the others at the trial.
I was never happy with Susan Atkins because she was one of the most brutal killers, and the fact that we were giving her anything seemed to fly in the face of justice.
The prosecutor now turns to another member of Manson's family, Linda Kasabian, who had witnessed the murders from outside the house. Kasabian is offered immunity in exchange for her full testimony during the trial.
She didn't know that they were going to commit murder that night. She went along. Now, why did Manson choose her? He certainly should have seen in her that she was not a killer type. But she's the only one in the family that had a driver's license. And that's why I think he wanted her to go along. But she was different. She was really the only flower child, in my opinion, in the family. She was a proverbial star witness for the prosecution.
With Linda Kasabian in his corner, Bugliosi is ready to take on Charles Manson.
I told Manson early on, I said, Charlie, I'm going to convict you, but I said, after you get a fair trial.
During jury selection, Bugliosi notices that Manson is staring him down.
And obviously he's trying to intimidate me. I was looking at his eyes, but I could see his hands were trembling. That gave me an opportunity to talk to him and say, how come your hands are trembling, Charlie? Are you afraid of me or something? He said, why would I be afraid of you? And he said, you know, Bugliosi, you got the wrong idea about me. You think I'm a bad guy. I said, yeah, Charlie, I do think you're a bad guy.
The trial begins on July 24th. The whole country now knows the name Charles Manson. And in L.A., many fear what he and his family might do next.
There was a palpable tension in that courtroom. The world press was there, and it was because of one person, Charles Manson.
When Manson enters the courtroom, the spectators are astonished to see that he has carved a bloody X into his forehead. His explanation, I have X'd myself from your world. Following their leader, defendants Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten cut X's into their foreheads. Outside the courthouse on the corner of Temple and Broadway, Manson family members are holding vigil 24 hours a day.
And whatever he would do in court, they would emulate him out in the corner. The very next day, they had all carved X's on their foreheads.
On day 3, Linda Kasabian takes the stand. With Bugliosi as her guide, she calmly relates her bizarre experiences as a member of Manson's family.
They were looking for a leader. And Manson, in effect, told them that in return for surrendering your mind, your soul to me, I will relieve you of your responsibility to determine what to do with your life. I'll do all the thinking for you. Manson very cleverly, he'd go on many LSD trips with his family, but he'd take a smaller dosage of LSD than they would, or take no LSD at all, so he could retain more control over his mental faculties. And while they were on these trips, he would dig down deep into their psyche.
Kasabian then describes the murders, often supplying pieces of the puzzle left out by Susan Atkins.
Susan was inside stabbing, so she didn't see what went on outside, but Linda was outside and saw Patricia Krenwinkel chase Abigail Folger off to the front lawn and stab her to death.
Kasabian is on the stand for 17 days. Even after a grueling cross-examination, she comes across as an extremely credible witness.
She really had equanimity, and she felt that even though she did not participate in these murders, if she had to go to prison for it, she was willing to do it. She thought this was just horrible what happened, and she knew from the very beginning that, she said, I'm the one that's going to have to tell the truth.
Outside the Hall of Justice, Manson family members remain on vigil. I'm waiting for my father to get out of jail, one says to a reporter. During the trial, members of the press question Manson at every opportunity, and he is happy for the forum.
Always feels good. Everything is good. This morning, the judge made a fool of himself. Again. And then he questions my sanity. I question his, huh? Are you sane? Sane? Yes. That's relative.
The Manson trial even attracts the attention of the President of the United States.
Nixon is in Denver, Colorado at a law enforcement convention, and there was a press conference. Somehow the Manson case came up, and he started talking about it. And he said in so many words, no question, that this man, Manson, is guilty. And it was a big story the next day all over the country. The most relevant headline, LA Times, following morning, Manson guilty, Nixon says. Someone brought that paper into the courtroom. Manson got a hold of it, stood up in front of the jury with a kind of a childlike smile on his face, or a grin, as if he was somehow proud that the president had taken notice, and he shows the jury the headline. That threw the trial into a tizzy. There was an immediate motion for a mistrial.
Judge Charles Older decides to let the trial continue.
Your Honor, how can you allow this to happen?
On another occasion, Manson reveals his rage.
Charlie Manson is a man.
He got a hold of a sharp pencil, and he leaped over the console table, and he was approaching the judge. And immediately the bailiffs tackled him and dragged him out of court, and he shouted out to the judge, in the name of Christian justice, I want you to chop off your head.
During the course of the trial, Bugliosi is also threatened by Manson.
Manson puts me on his so-called death list. And of course, from that point on, I had a bodyguard 24 hours a day, and we had walkie-talkies in the house in case they cut the telephone wires like they did at the Tate residence.
To solidify his case, Bugliosi calls to the stand other members of the Manson family, an employee from Spahn's Ranch, Susan Atkins' fellow inmates, and dozens of others who testify to Manson's domination of the family.
He'd tell them that these people you're killing, he said, don't look upon them as being decent human beings. Look upon them instead as being symbols of a sick society that can only be cured by a violent revolution. And perhaps psychologically, it's easier to stab a symbol than it is to stab a human being. It's the power of Manson's personality, the evil genius of Charles Manson.
On several occasions, the unpredictable Manson requests to speak to Bugliosi after the day's proceedings.
Prosecutors do not talk to defendants unless they take the witness stand. It's just not done. This was different here. Why? Because he wanted to talk to me. We said, well, yeah, I'm responsible for the murders, the way the Beatles are, the way music is, the way television shows are.
On November 19th, 22 weeks after the start of the trial, Vincent Bugliosi declares that the people of California rest.
And I told the jury that it was just inconceivable that these people would have gone out on their own and committed some of the most horrendous murders imaginable without his direction and guidance, because he controlled their daily activity.
But the defiant Manson would soon unveil a surprise strategy of his own. Fall 1970, Los Angeles. Prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi has rested his case against Charles Manson and his co-defendants. Across the country, the trial has come to be about more than a grisly series of murders. To many, the Manson family embodies the dark side of the 60s counterculture.
There are people who feel that the Manson murders brought an end to the decade of love.
On November 19th, defense lawyers shocked the court when they announced that they are not going to call any witnesses. But Manson has one last trick up his sleeve. His co-defendants, still under his control, demand to take the stand. They now claim that they were solely to blame for the murders and that Manson was not involved. Their sacrifice means little to the head of the family.
He told me he couldn't care less about these girls. I said, you know, they're willing to go to the gas chamber to save your life. And you're telling me you couldn't care less about them. I said, are they aware of this? He said, of course they are. He said, I told them that. I'm the most selfish person alive.
Court is adjourned for the day. The next morning, Manson switches gears again. He now wants to make a statement before the young women testify. Because of the unusual circumstances, the jury is excused. Manson's oration lasts for over an hour.
He speaks in metaphors and everything. He's not dumb. Anyone that knows Manson will tell you he's very bright. And what he's saying is that he picked up these kids that society discarded alongside of the road, and he brought them to his own garbage pile and tried to teach them how to live and think for themselves.
Satisfied that he has made an impact, Manson tells the girls that they, quote, don't have to testify now. In his final summation, Bugliosi again stresses the relevance of Helter Skelter.
When the words Helter Skelter were found printed in blood at the murder scene, that was tantamount to Manson's fingerprints being found at the murder scene.
On January 15th, 1971, after almost a month of final arguments, the jury begins its deliberations.
The decision is in the hands of 12 people chosen from this community, and I'm not going to predict what they're going to do, but I certainly am confident.
I thought the evidence was overwhelming. I gave a pretty powerful final summation, but there was this worry that maybe 1 out of 12 would hang it up, in which case we'd have to try the whole thing all over again. I did have that worry, but I found it unimaginable that 12 jurors would come into court and say that Manson and his co-defendants were not guilty.
After 10 tense days, the jury files back into the courtroom, and the verdicts are handed to Judge Older. Nearly a year and a half after the brutal Tate LaBianca killings, all 4 defendants are found guilty. The jury has agreed with Bugliosi that even though Manson didn't raise a knife or fire a gun, he is just as much a murderer. The next day, Bugliosi goes before the court and asks that the defendants all be put to death.
There were many murder cases I handled where I did not ask for the death penalty, and those were situations where I felt there were some mitigating circumstances. Here, there were no mitigating circumstances, and the incredible brutality of these murders, my God, they showed no mercy on these people. Life imprisonment, that would be a frustration of justice.
During the penalty phase, the women finally get their chance to take the stand. All 3 admit to taking part in the murders and accuse Linda Kasabian, the prosecution's star witness, of masterminding the killings. Still protecting their leader, they say that Manson is innocent of all charges.
Manson would tell everyone, I love your brother, I'll die for your brother, death is beautiful, you know, it's just a different plane of existence, it's just an illusion. And we kill people, we're doing them a favor, you know, we're taking them away from this horrible life here. But let me tell you, he fought very hard for his own life.
On Monday, March 29th, the jury prepares to announce whether the killers will get life or death.
Yes, we have.
When the clerk read the verdict on whether it's going to be death or life, I looked over at Manson, and that's one of the most suspenseful moments in a courtroom. Some lawyers can't even show up in court. Believe me, that's a suspenseful moment. And I looked over at Manson, and his hands were trembling.
The jury sentences the 4 defendants to death. Manson is taken to San Quentin, the girls to the California Institute for Women at Frontera to await execution. At the time, the prosecution of the Manson family is the longest murder trial in U.S. history, nearly 10 months. On October 12, 1971, Bugliosi successfully prosecutes Tex Watson on 7 counts of first-degree murder. Watson also receives the death penalty. But the fate of all of the killers is dramatically altered when on February 18, 1972, the state Supreme Court abolishes the death penalty in California. Their sentences are automatically reduced to life in prison.
I don't think of it.
In a sense, Manson has beaten the rap here. I mean, I hate to say that. Sending him to prison is not like sending the average person to prison. That's his home. He's institutionalized. He gets along very well.
In this 1987 interview, Manson was still defiant.
Guilty of what? There's no need to be guilty. Now you want me to suffer. So you put more pressure on me and beat me up some more and then say, now do you feel guilty? Then you're going to make me suffer till I say, okay, now I feel guilty. And then you feel secure now that I feel guilty? Was that going to make you feel better if I feel guilty? Guilty. I wouldn't do anything that I felt guilty about.
Charles Manson is currently incarcerated in California's Corcoran State Prison. Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten are still prisoners at the California Institution for Women, Frontera. The whereabouts of Linda Kasabian, who left California after the trial, are unknown. Today, Manson is still regarded as one of the most infamous serial killers of all time.
He's come to represent the dark and malignant side of humanity. And again, for whatever reason, there's a side to human nature that is fascinated by pure, unalloyed evil. Evil has its allure. That's probably why we're still fascinated with Hitler, Jack the Ripper, Charles Manson. As someone who knows Manson a lot better than I do, said, quote, death is Charlie's trip, unquote.
Vincent Bugliosi is well aware that while his book Helter Skelter made him famous, it has also linked him forever to his foe.
No matter what I've done, there's this irrevocable connection between Manson and me. I can no longer escape Manson, and I could jump away from my own shadow.
Even though many years have passed since the Manson murders, the fear that they generated is still etched onto our consciousness.
It's got to be considered among the most nightmarish murders in the recorded annals of American crime. Best prosecutor in the office, the top trial lawyer.
Was there anything...
That November, he gets a case that thrusts him into the national spotlight. The savage murders of actress Sharon Tate and 6 others. In time, the case will expose the dark side of the counterculture and pit Bugliosi against one of the most enigmatic criminals of all time, Charles Manson. When it's all over, Bugliosi will turn the experience into a book, the uniquely shocking true crime tale, Helter Skelter. The publisher's simple yet chilling introduction to this best-selling tour de force, the story you are about to read, will scare the hell out of you. Saturday morning, August 9th, 1969. The LAPD receives a frantic call. A multiple homicide at 10,050 Cielo Drive. Officers enter the home through a side window. DeRosa approaches the front entrance. The word pig is scrawled in blood on the front door. In the living room, they discover body number 4. Female, very pregnant, probably in her 20s, stabbed multiple times. A white nylon rope is looped around her neck twice, one end extending over a rafter on the ceiling, the other end leading across the floor to body number 5. Male, about 5'6", shot and stabbed.
There was 102 stab wounds altogether. The type of thing you don't even see in horror movies. The consensus of even some of the hardcore detectives that they'd never seen such a scene of human massacre in their entire career. They were just aghast at it.
Here, this is DeRosa, 5320.
At 9:40 a.m., Officer DeRosa calls headquarters requesting backup. year is 1969. America is divided over the war in Vietnam. Easy Rider tops the box office. Woodstock rocks a generation. It's the heyday of the counterculture. But 35-year-old Vincent Bugliosi is focused on building his career. The ambitious prosecutor has been with the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office for 5 years. He is not afraid to get his hands dirty.
I was handling one case after another, working 7 days a week. One robbery, rape, murder case after another.
His conviction rate is stellar. 104 trials, 103 convictions.
My goal down at the DA's office was to become the best.
This program contains scenes that have been dramatized, with special attention given to historical accuracy. Los Angeles, Saturday, August 9th, 1969. The city of angels sleeps quietly, unaware that a man named Charles Manson is about to plunge it into terror.
Just an incredible orgy of murder.
Manson, borrowing from the Beatles, gives it a name, Helter Skelter.
If you're not safe in your home, where are you safe?
It will be up to LA law enforcement and prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi to go head-to-head with this charismatic force of darkness.
I realized that it would be one of my biggest mistakes I could ever make to underrate him.
The home of actress Sharon Tate and her new husband, film director Roman Polanski. Los Angeles police officers Jerry Joe DeRosa and William T. Weisenhunt are the first on the scene. In a white car parked in the driveway, they find a body. Male, Caucasian, appears to be in his teens. He's been shot 4 times. On the front lawn, they find body number 2. Male, probably in his 30s, about 5 feet 10, shot, stabbed, and bludgeoned. Body number 3. Female, probably in her late 20s, stabbed repeatedly.
There was no reason to check the pulse. It was obvious just by looking at the bodies that they were dead.
The house seems quiet, too quiet. As the other officers